All right, so this video is a little different, as you can probably tell. It is a lot cheaper, and it's really just an exercise for me in improvisation because I need to learn to speak without a script. So I'm going to start doing that every once in a while. Also, a video like this takes very little time to produce. There we go. Yeah. So it takes very little time to produce, and therefore I can do more of them because there's subjects that I want to cover that they don't really warrant me going all the way out to the city and just spending 2 or 3 days and a couple $100 to shoot and, to test out these lenses and things. So the lenses that we're looking at today, we are comparing. I have like a whole box of manual lenses from years ago, old manual film lenses, and I have a whole bunch of 28mm lenses, like from all different manufacturers. And there's one that we couldn't test because I don't have an OM to Fuji X adapter, which it kind of sucks because the lens is actually of super high quality. It's not an Olympus lens. It's made by, I don't remember who, but I'll cover it some other time after I can get an adapter. And but I have a whole bunch of other manual lenses, and I'm creating this video because I want to show people kind of what to expect if they're going to go on eBay and buy manual lenses, especially people that are just starting out. Like I'm testing on an XE1, which is a boss starter camera. It is like, if you want to get started in photography and you're like serious, the XE1, XE2, any of those older Fuji X mount cameras, they're such a good value. I got mine for under $250. The price has shot up for some reason recently. I don't know why. I know it's not my fault because I have like 385 subscribers right now. Oh, speaking of that, also, when I hit 500 subscribers, I'm going to be doing a review of a weird product that I found at Walmart, and that will also be a face reveal, because then I think I can, I'm getting more and more comfortable, obviously speaking, so I think I can, start doing that too. And I'd also like to start vlogging and other things. But aside from that, let's look at these lenses. Now, of course, we have a control lens first. We are using the Fujinon 27mm f2.8. Yes, I know this is not a 28mm, it's a 27mm, but the field of view is almost the same on APS-C. It's the most modern thing I have to compare with. Also, it's kind of interesting because it's so tiny and it's really a compromised device. It's built to be really, really small, yet to work really, really well. I mean, Fuji, of course, is legendary in lenses, so they can do this kind of engineering, and it's a good lens, and we're going to just see how good. Now, with the testing, I have snapped 2 photos with each lens, only 2, and what I've done, they're both like pretty clinical. One is using a focusing target to show like aberrations, and it's all white around, so you can see any vignetting and you can see any weirdness of the lenses. And then the second one just has a lot more color and it has some 3-dimensional figures in it to give you more of an idea of like color rendition and everything else. All the lenses were shot at wide open f2.8 at 1/250th of a second, and at f5.6 at 1/80th of a second. So this is to show you what it looks like wide open and what it looks like when it's stopped down to pretty much peak sharpness. I mean, f5.6 is, for these kind of lenses, is pretty much where peak sharpness is, somewhere between f4 and f5.6. When you start getting to that level of stopping down with these things, the difference is pretty negligible. So it still gives you a good idea of what each lens is capable of. Now, this is the 27mm. We already went over it. I did allow it to autofocus. None of these other lenses have autofocus with the XE1 because they don't have any kind of electrical connection to the XE1. Most of them don't have electrical contacts at all because they're so old. These old manual lenses from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, they didn't have that back then. It's all manual. So this is the first contender, and this is a 24mm. I know it's not a 28, but I had to throw it in here because this is one of my favorite lenses of all time. As you can tell by all the dirt on it, I've used it quite a bit. This is a Sony A mount, which is the system that I'm coming from originally. 24mm f2.8. It's branded as a Quanta-Ray, and Quanta-Ray was a rebrand for camera stores for Sigma lenses. If you ever see a Quanta-Ray lens, 9 times out of 10, maybe even 10 times out of 10, it is a Sigma lens. And that's fine with me if you've seen the rest of my channel. It's from the early 90s, maybe late 80s. It's sharp. It gives you 24 millimeters on APS-C. Remember, all these are being used on APS-C. So if you see any weirdness with these lenses, it's going to be exacerbated if you're going to adapt them to full frame, like major exacerbation. Yeah, so the 24 millimeter gives you a 36 millimeter like field of view on APS-C, which is really nice. And I love this lens. It's sharp, it's great, but we're going to see just how great, because I've never like clinically tested it before. Next up, we have the Canon NFD 28 millimeter f2.8. NFD is new FD or Neo FD or something like that. This was from the late 80s. This is after autofocus technology started by, you know, Minolta made the first viable autofocus system with the Minolta A mount. Now, this is when Canon was still making some manual lenses. They made them a lot cheaper with the NFD because they're all plastic. They still feel pretty solid. They still feel pretty good. And the optics are good. I know the optics are good. I've used most of these lenses pretty extensively. And the optics in this are really good, and you're going to see that. Yeah, the NFD, FD mount. And it's kind of tricky to use the adapter because it has like a locking mechanism, so you have to make sure it's lined up or else you can't stop it down. But yeah, so this is a little bit more expensive. You're probably going to pay between 30 and 60 bucks for one of these on the Bay. I actually got this from a friend at my old job. He knew how much I like this kind of stuff, so he just gave it to me. It was one of his old ones, and he never really used it. And for that, I am still very thankful. The next one is the Pentax 28mm f2.8. This is from the 80s. This lens, I've never used too much. I don't know too much about it, and I haven't really analyzed the pictures because I want to do that. Oh, this is from 1993. Okay. Since this is from 1993, as you can tell by the QC pass label on there, this probably has really good optics compared to most everything else on here. This is probably going to be the biggest contender with the Fuji 27mm Pancake as far as quality goes. It's really well built. It's all metal, like, you know, they should be. Shame on you, Canon. This right here, this lens, this very low-end lens from Pentax is like the reason why I really like Pentax. It's because they don't skimp on the quality when it comes to build and stuff. They did in the later 90s, and they did with their autofocus systems, but when it came to this, they never went to plastic on their manual focus lenses for the K1000s that they were still making in 1993. Good on you, Pentax. I love you. Next up, Magnacon 28mm f2.8. Now, Magnacon is a store brand, and I forgot what store it's for, but this lens was actually manufactured by Tokina. And as you probably may, if you're watching this channel, you probably know Tokina is a good brand. This lens is from the maybe early 80s. I used it a lot. I used it a lot because not only is it a 28mm, it also has a little bit of macro to it. It's well built, it's all metal, and it was $8 on eBay. With a name like Magnacon, which is not a, you know, it's not a manufacturer. Most people don't know what that is, that, you know, it's a store brand, so it's made by somebody else. Most people just think it's like a no-name thing. So I was able to get it for $8. It also has a little bit of damage on the screw mount for the filter, but I'm not too worried about that. For $8, I'll take it. And you know what? For $8, if it's at least decent, which it at least is in my experience, then whatever. Next, JCPenney 28mm. I bought this at a thrift store for like 10 bucks now. One thing that I want to bring up really quick that I didn't bring up a little bit ago, which I should have, I've left the adapters on all these lenses because one of the big factors with buying these things is the size of the adapters, because some of these adapters almost double the size of the lens. And this makes a big difference on a small camera like the XE1, because at this point, the lens is like heavier than the camera and it's smaller. So it's kind of awkward. You know, when you're putting this thing in a bag or something, this is something to consider. You'll see how much more convenient it is to have a tiny lens like that Pancake. That's actually why I bought it, because I got tired of using these things. I don't even care about the autofocus or anything. I cared more about the size. And I knew the quality would be excellent, so I just went with it. But this JCPenney lens, I think I tested it once like 4 years ago, and it was pretty awful. I was able to dismantle it and clean it out and make sure there wasn't any fungus or anything in there. Honestly, it doesn't really look like it was used all that much. It just has a lot of storage grossness to it. Yeah, I don't have high hopes for this one, honestly. I don't know who made it. I know it's old. JCPenney, Sears, those big box stores, they had house brand lenses for a long time because back then they were super profitable. They could just go over to Asia, find a factory, have these things made as cheap as possible, slap their name on it, sell it in their store. So somebody would come in and buy like a Pentax body, and instead of paying the premium for the Pentax lens, if they don't care, they would just go and grab the JCPenney or Sears or whatever. And 28 millimeter. Usually these would be 28 millimeter, 50 millimeter, and 135 millimeter because those are like the cheapest and the most basic focal lengths for most people. 35 millimeter lenses are more expensive, or were more expensive to produce. Therefore, not as common. They're more desirable, honestly, because it's just a more natural field of view. A lot of people really like it. Next up, we have the Industar 69. Nice. So the Industar 69 is a Soviet lens. I think this one is from Ukraine. I don't remember where I ordered it from. This was made for a half-frame Soviet film camera from like the 60s, maybe into the 70s, but they made these things forever. And they're extremely cheap. They're really tiny because they're for half-frame, but the image circle covers at least APS-C. It should be fine. The thing about these lenses, the quality, as you're going to see, as you'll probably see, I don't know, like I said, I haven't really looked at the things yet, and I haven't really used this lens very much because the quality is pretty terrible. It's built well. It's built like a tank, a tiny, tiny tank. Actually, if you've ever played Tiny Tank on the PS1, I really like that game, and it's like a forgotten game. And it is M39 mount, but it actually required modification to get it to infinity focus because it is M39 threaded, but the flange distance is different on the cameras that it was designed for. It's kind of wonky, and you have to do a little bit of work to get it going. And you know, that extra work is actually kind of worth it because usually when you get these and they're used, they're filthy and they're gross and they need to be cleaned out. Next. So now we have tier list. I'm going to put these in order of what I think, how they're going to perform, having not looked at the pictures yet. So let me go down here and we're going to go into good old PowerPoint because everybody loves getting PowerPointed. And I'm going to say the Fuji is probably going to be an S tier. Now this is comparative. This isn't like this. I know this Fuji 27 millimeter pancake lens is not an S tier lens. Overall, I'd put it in like B tier. It's not that great in the grand scheme of things. And since I'm saying that, I also want to say that I am not one of those people that romanticizes camera equipment. I think that's really lame. Character is the kind of thing that I would tell people when I sold cars, like, oh, that car's got some character because it's got dents. To me, these are tools and they're designed to do something, and they either do it really well or they don't do it very well, or they're somewhere in between. But, you know, they don't care about you. So why should you care about them at, you know, this emotional level that these companies want you to take with these objects? They're just objects. In some languages, they're objectives. But we're going to put the Fuji in S tier because I think it's going to be the gold standard. Based on my experience, I'm going to put the Sigma 24 millimeter in A tier, and this is not counting that it's a 24 millimeter lens, so to me it's a better focal length, especially for APS-C. But in my experience, it's been super sharp and it's just been a really great lens. And I'm gonna say the Pentax is probably an A tier with the Sigma. They're both pretty good. The Sigma does have a little bit of an advantage. Well, no, because that Sigma, that is actually about the same age as the Pentax too, so. The Canon, I'm going to put in B tier because I'm thinking that this thing has been decosted. I didn't use it quite as much because I always kind of just stuck with the Magnacon because the closest focusing distance was better, so it made it more versatile. I'm going to put the Canon in the B tier because I think it's going to be good, but not quite as good as the Pentax or the Sigma. The JCPenney, honestly, from me testing it about a while back, it's F tier, it's garbage, and I do not recommend buying it. This is from like memory from like 3 years ago, so you know, accuracy be damned. The Magnacon I used a lot, even though I don't really care for a 28 millimeter on APS-C, but I did use it a lot just because I was dirt poor and that's what I had. I'm gonna put it in C tier because I know it's definitely far from perfect, but it's far from terrible. And the Industar, You know, the Industar, it's not made for APS-C. It's made for half frame 35mm film. It's from like it was designed in like the 50s or 60s, and it's like a Zeiss Tessar copy. I'm going to say it's like an E tier for some reason. Maybe not quite F tier. Somewhere between E and D, somewhere in there. So let's see if my guessing is correct, or you know, my educated guesses. Let's take a look. Okay, so first of all, now what I've done. Come on, don't do this. All right, cool. So what I've done is I put the camera, it's on a Manfrotto tripod that's not going anywhere. It's locked down to a very decent head. It's all pretty solid. And then I put this thing, this is a focusing test target. This is the kind of thing that you use when you calibrate a lens or to check for like chromatic aberration or anything like that. And instead of looking at 100%, we're just going to look at it, you know, on the screen right here, because you can get quite a bit of information. This is the Fuji 27mm. This is wide open, and this is at 1/250th of a second. It's got good detail up here. These are the things I'm looking at now. I had it focus on the small target over here because it's closer to the thing over here, and you can tell that its focusing is a little off. This is why I'm super not into autofocusing. Man, come on. All right, yeah, unscripted video. That's what I get. For just kicking around and walk around lens, it's fine. It's not that bad, as you can tell. Let's look at it, stop down to f5.6. Okay, so you can tell that quite a bit more is in focus, and it's pretty much takes in the whole thing. Yeah, it looks great. I don't see too much CA. I don't see too much anything. It looks fine. Now, one thing I do need to mention is that these are not straight out of camera JPEG files. These are RAW files that I've taken the lens correction off of, and then I've put them into a, then I just converted them to JPEG for the sake of the video. So there's no lens correction. So this is going to show you kind of what the basis that you have to work with is when you're using these lenses. One thing I do want to point out is that there's a little bit of vignetting because this is like a solid white background and it's all evenly lit. So you are seeing some vignetting around the edges at f2.8, but on such a tiny lens, that's really expected. And then it cleans up at f5.6. So good job, Fuji. You did a good job on one of your pro level pancake lens. Okay, so let's get to one that's a little more interesting here. Okay, so now we have the Sigma 24mm f2.8. Now you can tell instantly that this is a wider field of view. I threw it in here just because it's kind of similar and I wanted to just test it. And at the exact same settings, it's looking a little bit brighter. And you can see that the Fuji had a bit of more of a color cast to it. That's because it uses different coatings, much newer coatings. So there's more color cast, there's more contrast with that lens. Less contrast here, especially wide open. And the detail is pretty good if you look at the top of the target. Now the detail we're going to look at in more detail later with the second image on each one. This was manually focused against that smaller target. I couldn't quite tell if it was perfectly focused against the scale here. But that doesn't matter too much because what we're looking for is we're looking for how green it gets up here in the back in the further away out of focus objects and how purpley it gets in the closer out of focus objects. And this lens, wide open, it does a surprisingly good job for what it is. Because, just a reminder, this was made in the film era with old coatings, and this is designed for film. It's not designed for a digital sensor. And there's a difference between lens design for digital and lens design for film. They need to throw the light, or they need to, what's the word, like refract the light a different way. There's a lot of stuff on the internet about how this is. I could probably link, actually, yeah, I could link some of it in the description if you want to see. So yeah, at wide open, 24mm, pretty impressive for how old this lens is. And for the fact that this was not a real expensive lens either. I was able to get it, this is probably the cheapest 24mm I could find, especially for A mount. It was like, when I bought it, it was under $100. Stop down, it looks even better. It looks quite a bit better. I am pretty impressed. So a little soft up here in the details. I keep wanting to point with my finger, and I know you guys can't see that. A little soft up here in the details in this like rough texture. But here it just, damn, the contrast just pops. And that's really nice for a lens that's this old. This is at f5.6, 1/80th of a second on a tripod, on a target that was not moved between each lens. Another thing that I do want to remind you is that the The adapters are different sizes, so you might see a little bit of a disparity on the field of view simply because the lens is either more forward or more back from the sensor because it just, it has to be in order to function properly. Okay, this is the Canon, this is really hard to read, but this is the Canon NFD 28mm f2.8. You can tell wide open that it is actually softer than the 24, and it's definitely softer than the Fuji, but I think it's better than expected. And your green up here in the back and your purple up here in the front, it's a little more apparent with this lens, but for something from the late 80s, it's pretty damn good. I mean, I have some terrible lenses from that time period. Yeah, this is a pretty good design, and it's a pretty good lens overall. I would definitely take the Fuji or the Sigma over this, but, for being like $50, it's not bad. When stopped down to f5.6, it looks even better. You still have a little bit of that color difference here, but it's not bad. Nice and sharp, a lot of detail in this part here. And detail is something that we're going to look at more extensively anyway. Also, I think one of the benchmarks here is being able to see the cat hair on the target. Canon NFD 28mm, a pretty good lens. Magnacon Takina 28mm f2.8. This is the one that I got for $8 off of eBay. And as you can probably tell here, it is quite a bit softer. And you can even tell from here, and this isn't testing, this particular test isn't for this, but you can already see that the corners are softer too in here. And if the corners are like this on an APS-C sensor, they're going to be way worse on a full frame sensor. So that's something to keep in mind. It really depends on what you're buying for. The APS-C sensor is going to be more forgiving with the corners like this, and the full frame sensor, if it's older and lower resolution, is going to be more forgiving in the overall sharpness of the lens because the pixel density is lower on a full frame sensor. If it's, like a 24 megapixel full frame versus a 24 megapixel APS-C, that APS-C, since the pixel density is higher, is going to be a little tougher on that lens because it's also using a smaller area of it. But we're not, I don't want to get too far into that right now. So yeah, we got some color change issues here. You can still see the cat hair on here, so that's not too bad. And then f5.6, all that vignetting is pretty much gone. It's pretty even. It's not perfectly even, but it's still pretty even. And it is a little sharper. That's good on the Magnacon. Pretty good for $8. Not definitely far from perfect, but for something that cheap, not bad. So this is what I have dubbed the Soviet 69. Also, this is the Industar 69 28mm f2.8. This is the tiny half frame lens. It was designed back in the 60s, and you can tell that it's pretty awful. And that's to be expected. It's so soft that anything outside the center is going to be pretty much blah. Some people like this, especially for like portraits and stuff, but honestly, as a tool, and being like $40, there's better options. But that size advantage is pretty cool. But other than that, let's go to f5.6 and it cleans up tremendously. So this is a weird one because it's so bad at f2.8. But if you stop it down, that's not bad at all. That is not terrible. That's really interesting that it cleans up that much when you stop it down. So yeah, this is definitely... It has f2.8, but I wouldn't run it at f2.8. That is such a massive change. Cool. Okay, yeah. So that's our friend from the Soviet Union. Next up, this is the JCPenney lens, and it just looks like you're looking into the fog. Now, the vignetting isn't bad, but the sharpness is pretty awful, and the contrast is terrible. So there's just not much of it. And stopping it down doesn't really help. It's almost like this lens is fogged or has some kind of damage or something, but honestly, just looking at it, it looks like it was not used much. I think it's just a cheap lens, and going that cheap and going to something that was made to be that cheap, this is just what to expect. So I don't really recommend going that cheap if you're going to get into manual lenses. Okay, next up, I can't even tell what this is. Oh, this is the Pentax. Okay, so you're going to notice that the target is a little off. Now, I had to, I forgot to do the Pentax the first time, so I had to reset it up, so it might be a little bit different. But as you can tell, the Pentax is at f2.8. The Pentax is tack sharp. It's really good. It's better than the Sigma 24mm. It's pretty amazing. This, now, if you're going to get a 28mm manual lens, just, you know, something cheap for your mirrorless camera, this is already looking like an awesome option. And at 5.6, it just cleans up that vignette on the sides, and it still looks, and it looks great. It's tack sharp. It's a good lens. So yeah, the Pentax, I think, comes out on top as far as old manual lenses go. Okay, so this is our test scene number 2. Now, I've put these figures very three-dimensional, so there's a lot of edges and corners and things to look at. So this is going to give us a little bit more perspective on sharpness, and there's a lot of color going on here. So we're going to see a little bit of that too. And I put this sparkly thing in the background to give us kind of an idea of what it looks like when there's, you know, out of focus elements look like. And the Fuji 27mm, as expected, is pretty decent across the frame. When you're getting out toward the corners, it gets a little softer up in here. And this is like, if this was a vintage lens, this would be completely forgivable. I would say this is amazing, but this is modern. This is like $300. And since it is an APS-C lens, it's not using a sweet spot of the lens. It's using pretty much the whole thing. You are going to get some vignetting and a little bit of corner softness. Not quite as bad as the old lenses, but stopping it down, that pretty much goes away. Yeah, it evens out quite a bit. It's really sharp. But you can see, like, in the belt here, I keep using my finger, in the belt here on, I think this is Marth. No, this isn't Marth. I don't remember what character this is. This is Ichigo from Token Rambu. This is somebody from Fire Emblem. Now, you can tell the difference in sharpness. Ichigo's face is pretty sharp regardless. In the center. Center sharpness is good between 2.8 and 5.6, but at 5.6, the full frame becomes really sharp, which is what we're looking for in a lens like this. I think if I had made the shutter speed a little bit faster, you could see a little bit more bokeh back here with the sparklies. But yeah, not bad. Good showing. Okay, the Sigma 24mm, for sharpness, it's pretty uniform across the frame. Now, this is a full frame lens, so the center portion of it is going to, you know, the sharp portion is going to be bigger. Going on the outside here, there's a little bit of vignetting. It's not bad. And then going to 5.6 cleans everything up. And it actually looks fantastic at f5.6. There's some really good detail in the hair here with the mold casting. You can see the dust and the stuff that I didn't clean off on purpose. His missing hand, or her missing hand. I don't remember who this is. Yeah, I mean, it's not quite as sharp at 2.8, but it's at a more than tolerable level. I really like this lens, especially when it's stopped down. Look at the detail in here and here. I mean, I even think it might be trading blows with the Fuji, which is impressive. But yeah, so the Sigma 24mm f2.8, I still highly recommend for anybody wanting. Now, this lens is available in autofocus and manual focus options. I recommend, if you're going to do this, to get a manual focus one because it'll be cheaper. The optics are probably the same. I mean, it's got the same name and everything, and the focusing ring should be bigger. Canon NFD to 28mm f2.8. You can see it's real sharp in the center, but then the sharpness falls off very quickly along the edges. Let's see how it is stopped down to 5.6. It's better, but it's still not perfect. The sword here looks really good, but then anything past that, you start getting that kind of blurry. In the center, it looks great though, and the color rendition is really nice. Yeah, you can see the bit of the vignetting here that gets cleaned up afterwards. So as a reminder, if you're adapting this to full frame, this is going to be exacerbated quite a bit. Your vignette is going to be a lot stronger, and your corner softness is also going to be a lot more pronounced. But since this is a smaller sensor, We don't have as much of that issue, so it's kind of more forgiving in that regard. But the center sharpness is really impressive. And then, of course, moving to a 24 megapixel sensor, because this is 16 megapixels, is also going to reveal more flaws in the lens. The Magnicon Tokina, a lot of vignetting, a lot of corner softness, and it's even not quite as sharp in the center. I do like this the autofocus elements. The bokeh balls look pretty good, but there's a lot of vignetting going on. So stop down cleans it up quite a bit. It's still kind of dark over here, and the sharpness on the corners and the sides is not fantastic. The Magnicon Tokino lens, it's super cheap if you can find one. It has that macro function, so it's really practical, but honestly, I would spring for something a little better. The Soviet 69, aka the Industar 69, 28mm f2.8. As you can tell, it has that swirly bokeh thing that people talk about. Some people like it, some people really don't. I think it's pretty cool. It's a neat effect, but overall at f2.8, this lens is pretty awful. You know, as expected, it's a half frame lens from the 1960s, I think, 50s, 60s, somewhere in there. And it was made to be really tiny. And the vignette is pretty bad. But stopping it down to 5.6, it cleans up significantly. It's brighter, the contrast is better, everything about it's better. You still get a little bit of the swirly bokeh thing going on. It's better on the corners and the edges as far as sharpness goes. It's pretty sharp in the center. This plant looks pretty good. Still not too big of a fan, but that's a really big improvement. I mean, that's a massive improvement. That almost looks like a totally different lens, but you can tell it's not, because it has the same characteristics in here as far as the autofocus elements go. Moving on, this is the JCPenney lens, and you can see the difference that the mount adapter makes, because they're both 28mm, and I know there are variances, especially with something like this, where it might actually be like a 27 or 26.5 or 29 or something like that in reality, but they market it as a 28. But that mount adapter is making a huge difference in the field of view. This is quite a bit more zoomed in than the other one, despite also being 28mm, because the mount adapter for this M42 JCPenney lens is huge. And the JCPenney lens, as expected from the other tests, is pretty terrible. Contrast is not there. Colors, whatever. It looks a little better in the center, but going off to the sides is pretty much unusable. The contrast doesn't improve when stopped down, although the sharpness does quite a bit. It's not quite as jarring of a difference as with the Industar stop down from 2.8 to 5.6, but would not recommend this lens to anyone. This might be okay for like a dreamy portrait thing, but I mean, that puts it into like one trick pony territory, and 28mm is not great for portraits. It messes with people's proportions too much, at least in my taste. So the Pentax 28mm, it looks great in the center, and the contrast is really good, but man, that corner sharpness is bad. I mean, it's pretty nasty. It's almost like there's something wrong with it. I would like to see other copies of this lens to see if there are better ones. It looks great in the center, but this is just bad. This is a thing, you know, to expect if you're ordering an old used lens like this. QC was not the greatest back then. They didn't have the kind of technology that we have now to make sure that these lenses perform, to make sure that they perform at the level that they're supposed to. So a lot of stuff like this just kind of made it through. It might be the design, you know, it might have been like, okay, this is a cheap lens, this is acceptable. I mean, getting stuff like this is just what to expect when you're shopping for lenses like this. And, you know, if you get it for 30, 40 bucks and it comes out like this and you're like, man, that sucks, then you're out. But stopping it down to 5.6 improves quite a bit. It's still like, this is not what I would consider acceptable as far as sharpness goes in the corners, but it looks so good in the middle, and the contrast is great. So this lens I think this lens has more modern coatings to it than most of the other ones because it is from the 90s. Man, that center looks awesome. The color looks so good. It's just so nasty on the sides. So I'm really wondering if I just have like a kind of a crappy copy of this lens, and I'd like to see what another one looks like. Moving on though, yeah. So where are we at now? We've looked at all of them. I'm going to move the Fuji. I'm going to be super critical on it because it's new, and it's kind of expensive, and it's marketed as a professional lens to A tier, because I don't think it's quite an S tier lens. In fact, I don't think there is an S tier lens in here. I'm going to keep the Sigma 24mm at A tier because I think for what it costs, it's excellent, and it's what I recommend. The Pentax is somewhere between B and C tier just because I think it's an inconsistency with their QC, how soft it is on the sides. So it's kind of like a buyer beware kind of thing. Let's see here. The Canon. I'm going to put it somewhere. I'm going to put it in a B tier. I'm going to put it in B tier because it's pretty uniform in its capabilities. And it's decently sharp. It's decently contrasty. It's not bad. And for the price, I mean, if you can find one between like 30 and 50 bucks, I don't know exactly what they are nowadays, but it's a pretty solid choice overall. The only thing about the Canon that I noticed when using it over time is that the minimum focusing distance kind of sucks compared to a lot of the other ones. JCPenney is F tier garbage. Would not even consider it. If I could go back in time and if I saw it at a thrift store again for $10, I would just leave it. The Industar is weird because it cleans up so much at f5.6, but it's so bad at f2.8, but it's so bad at f2.8 that could actually be kind of useful for some things, like some moody low light portraiture or something like that. So I don't even know where I'm going to stick it. I'm going to make it like sideways, and then I'm going to put it like this because it's unique and it's interesting, and you know, it has its uses. It has some entertainment value to it. I mean, yeah, these are tools. They're not really made to be toys, but this is kind of a fun lens. And then the Magnacon, you know, for $8, it's solid AB, but I'm going to put it C. I do like that it has a macro capability, and I do like that macro probably evens out the distortion a little bit, but it's not that great compared to what else is out there. And if you can spend more than $8 or $10 on a lens, I'd recommend getting something else. I would definitely recommend skipping on a 28mm altogether and getting into 24. I would honestly recommend I almost want to recommend the 24 over the 27, because the 27, it's pretty good. It's got modern coatings. It's got autofocus, but the performance is, you know, $300 versus like $60 to $90, $69. I don't know. I don't know if it's really there. And yeah, that's it. So that's kind of what to expect when you're shopping for old lenses. You know, I just wanted to put together something for anybody who's about to go on eBay and buy their first manual lenses for their older mirrorless camera. Like, I bought the XE1 specifically to use these because I came from film. I started with film. I had a lot of manual stuff just from thrift stores and whatever building up, and I wanted to use them digitally. So I bought the XE1 because at the time it was the best price to performance, kind of, because the lens system is super expensive. So it's hard to justify buying lenses for it because it's so old. And yet the quality of the machine itself is so high, and the image quality is really high. Looking back on it now, would I have done that? Probably not. I probably would have bought like a Nex C3 or something even cheaper, just because most of these lenses are not really at the kind of standards that I want. And it really just depends on who you are, what you want, what stage you're at in photography and learning how to do it and everything. And yeah. So that's about it for the video. Like and subscribe if you want to see more. I might do more of these kinds of videos just because they're so easy. Just, you know, just to get stuff out there and get ideas out there and things. And I think information like this can help a lot of people. So I really wanted to do it because a lot of people ask me on a day-to-day basis, hey, what should I buy? And so, yeah, I'm going to make more of these buyer's guide type videos. And if you like that kind of thing, tell me in the comment section below. I know the production values are not as high as my typical video, which honestly, those aren't all that high either. But, you know, I'm just trying to do something a little helpful. So, yeah, see you in see you later, and join up with the Discord if you want to talk and show off your stuff and show off your results and everything like that. So yeah, have a good day, and goodbye.